Do not feed her. She is not a customer.
I only needed somewhere warm for a minute.
Then sit outside. She is a customer tonight. Eat while it's hot. Is this how you feed your daughter? By giving her dinner to strangers? Leave my daughter out of this! A struggling father. What are you going to do about it?
You shouldn't have done that.
Margaret, we already have a strategy.
No, you have a cover story. The woman you refused to feed was me.
Thanks for watching. Follow A Brighter Destiny for more powerful stories, and don't forget to subscribe.
Do not feed her. She is not a customer. Preston Wade said it loud enough that for the whole diner to hear, and for one cold second, every fork in the room stopped halfway to every mouth. Rain hammered the windows of the Prescott family kitchen on Riverside Drive in Asheville, North Carolina, turning the parking lot into a sheet of trembling amber light. The clock above the register read 9:52 p.m. The place smelled of scorched coffee, warm grease, and vinyl booths, wiped clean one too many times to still smell clean. In the corner booth sat a woman in a faded olive green coat, her gray-streaked hair damp from the storm, her hands wrapped around an empty paper cup as if it still held heat. She had given the waitress a name that night, Ruth Callahan. That was the name she used when she asked quietly for something small and warm, and promised she would pay when she could. The waitress looked at her shoes first, then her coat, then the empty cup. "This is not a shelter," she muttered loud enough to be heard 2 booths over. A man in a gray sport coat laughed under his breath. A woman across the aisle pulled her purse a little closer to her body. Ruth lowered her eyes. That was the exact moment. Wyatt Calloway walked through the door with $4.11 left in his pocket, a pharmacy bag tucked under one arm, and the particular tired walk of a man who had already spent his whole day being strong for somebody else. He did not look like anybody's hero. His flannel jacket was frayed at both cuffs. His work boots carried old salt stains that never fully washed out, no matter how many winters passed. His face had the kind of quiet exhaustion that comes from double shifts, red bills stacked on a kitchen counter, and bedtime stories read over a stomach that had gone empty hours ago. At home, across town in a 2-room apartment above a shuttered hardware store, his 8-year-old daughter Daisy was waiting, probably drawing houses with yellow windows, the way she always did when she wanted the world to feel safe again. Wyatt had promised her supper, not much tomato soup, 2 slices of bread and butter if the cook felt generous that night. It was supposed to be their last real meal before payday, split carefully, stretched fairly, made cheerful by a father who had learned how to smile around hunger, without his daughter ever noticing the trick. He ordered it at the counter and paid with folded bills warmed soft by his palm. Then he heard Preston's voice again. Escort her out. Ruth stood slowly, her cheeks flushed with shame instead of anger. "I am sorry," she said. "I only needed to sit for a minute." "Then sit outside," Preston answered. And 3 quick laughs followed his words like an echo he had been waiting for. Wyatt turned with the tray still in his hands. The soup trembled in its white bowl. The bread steamed against a folded napkin. He looked at Ruth, then at the door where the rain swept sideways across the sidewalk in gray sheets. He took one long breath, the kind a man takes right before he decides that doing the right thing is going to cost him something real. Then he crossed the room and set the tray down in front of her. "Stay with me here, because what happens in the next 4 minutes decides everything that follows. And I promise you, it is worth every second." "She's a customer tonight," Wyatt said quietly. Preston looked him over, unbothered, almost amused. "And who exactly are you?" "Just a man sharing dinner," Wyatt answered. "With what money?" someone whispered from a nearby booth. Wyatt heard it. Ruth heard it. He did not answer. Instead, he pulled the napkin from beneath the bread, folded 1 slice with careful hands, and tucked it into his jacket pocket for Daisy. "Eat while it's hot," he told Ruth. She looked at him like he had handed her something far larger than a bowl of soup. "Before we go further, tell me where you're watching this from. Drop your city in the comments below, because these stories mean more when we know who's listening." Now, back to that diner, because nobody in that room understood what they had just done. The woman they had humiliated in a $2 coffee cup was Margaret Ashworth, the chief executive officer of the company that owned every table, every sign, and every silence in that room. Wyatt did not know her real name, and that ignorance mattered more than anyone in that diner could have guessed. If he had known that her signature could move markets before 9 in the morning, the gift might have looked smaller in his own eyes. But he knew nothing except that a woman was cold, hungry, and being made to feel invisible. So he stood there with his hands empty and his daughter's bread folded against his ribs, while Preston Wade stared at him like poverty itself was something contagious. Elves. You think this makes you noble? Preston asked. Wyatt did not answer right away. The rain kept tapping the glass behind them. Elves. The fluorescent light above the counter buzzed once and steadied. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pan clicked hard against a burner, sharp and lonely in the quiet. Elves. No, Wyatt finally said. I think it makes her warm for 10 minutes. A few people in the room looked down at their plates. Elves. Not because he had shamed them loudly, because he had refused to. 10 years earlier, Wyatt had worked HVAC installation for a company 2 counties over, made honest money, and came home every night to a small, rented house with a porch light and laughter behind the screen door. Elves. Then his wife Sarah got sick. Then the bills came in waves he could not outswim. Then the house went. Elves. Then Sarah was gone, and Wyatt was left with an 8-year-old, a shoebox of photographs, and a promise whispered beside a hospital bed at 3:14 in the morning. Elves. Keep her safe, keep her kind, never let this world teach her that love has a price tag on it. Elves. Since then, every day had become a quiet negotiation with survival. Rent came first, electricity came second. Daisy's inhaler came whenever her asthma flared, no matter what else had to wait. Elves. He worked the overnight shift unloading trucks at a regional freight warehouse off Highway 25 for $11.40 an hour, then picked up weekend repair work, fixing porch and hinge lights and loose cabinet hinges for whatever $30 people were willing to hand him. Elves. Still, the apartment stayed cold near the windows, and the refrigerator made a hollow, embarrassed sound whenever Daisy opened it looking for something that wasn't there. Elves. What Wyatt feared most was never the hunger. He could carry hunger quietly enough that Daisy rarely noticed. Elves. What he feared was the manila envelope sitting on his kitchen table from the County Family Services office, the one that said his custody arrangement would be reviewed unless he could prove stable income, adequate housing, and consistent meals. Elves. Those words followed him everywhere that day. Stable, adequate, consistent. Words built for people with accounts in second cars, not for a father patching his daughter's winter coat with thread pulled from an old work shirt. Elves. Earlier that evening, Daisy had stood at the window in her socks, holding up a crayon drawing of the two of them at a long table covered in food. Elves. Daddy, she had asked, when payday comes, can we get the soup with the little star noodles? Wyatt had smiled in a way that did not let the question break anything visible. Elves. We can do even better than that, sweetheart, he said. Maybe bread, too. She had grinned like he'd promised her a castle with a moat around it. Elves. That grin was the whole reason the meal in front of him mattered so much. It was not just soup. Elves. It was proof he could still bring something home, and yet standing under the buzzing fluorescent lights, watching Ruth lift the spoon with a trembling hand, Wyatt felt no regret. Elves. Only a quiet ache, and underneath that ache, a strange kind of peace, because a man with almost nothing still has exactly one choice left to make. Elves. He can guard the little he has until it turns hard and cold inside him, or he can give one piece of it away and remember in that same instant that he is still human. Elves. Across the table, Ruth took a small bite, and her eyes filled with something she tried very hard to hide. Elves. Wyatt looked away to protect what was left of her dignity. Preston saw only a poor man wasting food on a poorer woman. Elves. But Ruth saw the folded napkin disappearing into Wyatt's pocket. She saw the careful, deliberate way he had saved half a slice of bread for someone he loved more than his own hunger. Elves. And for the first time all day, the most powerful woman in that entire company began to feel something close to shame. Elves. Her mind was no longer in the diner. It had traveled back to a glass tower in downtown Charlotte that same morning, 40 floors above streets where people hurried past with paper coffee cups and clean shoes, where nobody looked hungry unless hunger had already been converted into a slide on a projector screen. Elves. At 8:15 a.m., Margaret Ashworth had sat at the head of a long walnut table while Preston clicked through a presentation full of smiling stock photo families, warm bowls, and words like community, compassion, and access. Elves. The numbers were flawless, too flawless. Food waste was down. Labor costs were down. Public approval scores were up 3 points. Elves. Preston stood beside the screen in a charcoal suit, his voice smooth as expensive leather. The regional system has never been leaner, he said. Elves. More efficient, more profitable. Margaret had watched the slide change to a photograph of a little boy holding a bowl of soup under the Prescott Family Kitchens logo, and something inside her had gone very still. Elves. What happened to the community meal program, she asked. Preston did not blink. Reallocated, he said. That was not my question, Margaret answered. Elves. It was underused, he continued. Expensive, difficult to manage. People abused it. 3 answers, quick and polished. 2 board members nodded along without looking up. Elves. An assistant kept typing, as if morality could be filed away in a bullet point. Margaret leaned back and studied the photograph again. Elves. She recognized that boy's face, because she had personally approved that campaign 7 years earlier, back when her father still ran the company. Back when Prescott Family Kitchens believed a restaurant owed the world something more than a quarterly profit margin. Elves. Her father used to say, food was never just food. It was welcome, it was dignity. It was the first language Mercy ever learned to speak. Elves. But after his death, the company had grown faster than her grief could keep pace with, and men like Preston had learned to wrap cold decisions in warm, well-lit words. Elves. Then the envelope arrived, no return address, delivered to her private office by building security at 441 that same afternoon. Elves. Inside were 3 things: a printed complaint from a former warehouse employee, photographs of sealed trays of edible food dumped behind a store at 11:02 p.m. on a Tuesday. Elves. And a handwritten note that read, "They are using your name to turn hungry people away." At the bottom, one more line, "Ask about Asheville." Elves. Margaret read it twice, then a third time. "Who sent this?" she asked her chief of staff. "We don't know yet," came the answer. Elves. "Does Preston know?" "Not unless you tell him." So she didn't. Instead, she canceled her afternoon meetings, removed the thin gold watch her mother had given her, left her phone and her driver behind, and bought a second-hand olive coat from a thrift store 3 blocks from the office. Elves. She took 81 cents in loose change, a city bus pass, and the borrowed name Ruth Callahan, a name plain enough to vanish inside completely. Elves. All day she had walked into places that carried her family's name on the sign out front. At one location, a cashier told her the restroom was for paying customers only. Elves. At another, a manager asked her to leave before the lunch rush arrived. At a grocery store owned by the same company, a security guard trailed her down the canned goods aisle until she stepped back out into the cold on her own. Elves. Nobody had shouted at first. That was the strange, quiet part of it. Cruelty did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it came wrapped in a smile that never reached the eyes. Elves. Sometimes it came through a policy recited without a shred of mercy in it. Sometimes it came through a door held open, just wide enough for someone to be gently pushed out of it. Elves. By the time she reached Asheville, the rain had soaked clean through her shoes, and her pride had worn thinner than the coat draped over her shoulders. Elves. She had come looking for the truth, and now the truth was sitting across the table from her in the shape of a tired stranger who had just given away the only meal he had bought for his own child. Elves. If you've made it this far, I want you to sit with that image for 1 second, because what happens next in that boardroom the following afternoon is the part people never forget. Elves. Preston stepped closer to the booth, his polished shoes stopping just short of the small puddle dripping off Ruth's coat. Elves. "You're making everyone uncomfortable," he said. Wyatt looked around the diner, at the lowered eyes, the half-finished plates, the phones already angled toward him. Elves. "No," Wyatt said. "Hunger makes people uncomfortable. I'm just setting a bowl down in front of it." The words weren't loud. Elves. They traveled anyway. Ruth kept her hands wrapped around the spoon, afraid that if she moved too fast, the whole fragile mercy of the moment might shatter. Elves. The soup was simple: tomato, a little black pepper, a few soft noodles settled at the bottom of the bowl. Elves. But to her it tasted like something older than comfort. It tasted like being seen without having to prove she deserved it first. Elves. "You do this often?" Ruth asked quietly. "Only when somebody needs it more than I do," Wyatt answered. "And do you?" she asked. Elves. "Need it?" Wyatt looked toward the window where rain ran down the glass in long silver lines, and for a moment the noise of the diner thinned into nothing but the hum of the lights. Elves. He could have lied easily. Men like him learn to lie kindly. "I already ate. I have food at home." Elves. "I'm fine." Instead, he said, "I have a little girl waiting. Her name is Daisy." Ruth lowered the spoon. "Then you should take this back," she said. Elves. "No, please eat," Wyatt answered. 3 small words, no speech behind them, just a line drawn quietly and held. Preston folded his arms across his chest. Elves. "This is sentimental nonsense," he said. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one last time to leave." Wyatt turned to face him fully. Elves. "And I'm going to ask you one last time to let her finish eating." The waitress froze near the coffee station. Elves. The man in the gray coat lowered his phone, not because Wyatt sounded threatening, he didn't. His voice had stayed calm, almost gentle, through the whole exchange. Elves. But there are moments when calm becomes stronger than anger, when respect stands so still and so certain that disrespect is forced to reveal exactly what it is. Elves. Preston's smile thinned. "Mercer," he said slowly, then caught himself. "Wyatt Calloway." You work the night shift at the Highway 25 warehouse. Elves. I remember your name now. You're the one who filed those complaints about food being thrown out behind the store. Elves. It wasn't a complaint, Wyatt said quietly. It was an accusation. It was food. 3 words, plain and heavy. The diner seemed to shrink around them. Elves. Grant, no. Preston took 1 step closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound personal, while still letting the whole room hear every word of it. Elves. You know what I think? I think men like you love a cause because it distracts from your own failure. Elves. You can't fix your own life, so you point at everyone else's. Wyatt's hands relaxed at his sides. He didn't defend his poverty. Elves. He didn't list his shifts, or his bills, or the nights Daisy slept warm because he'd chosen to stay cold. Elves. A person with real dignity doesn't answer every insult. Sometimes he lets it stand there, naked and ashamed of itself, in the middle of the room. Elves. But Preston wasn't finished. Tell me, Wyatt, he said, tilting his head. Is this how you feed your daughter? Giving away dinner to strangers so people can clap for you online? Elves. The words landed hard. Ruth looked up sharply. Wyatt looked down at the bowl, at the spoon in Ruth's hand, at the folded bread pressed against his chest with Daisy's purple crayon heart drawn on the corner of the napkin. Elves. For 1 brief second, pain crossed his face before he gathered it back into silence. Leave my daughter out of this, he said. Elves. Why, Preston replied. She's part of the story, isn't she? A struggling father, a sad little girl, a heroic bowl of soup. Elves. It's almost touching. A few people shifted in their seats now, no longer amused. The waitress stared at the floor. Elves. Even the man in the gray coat lowered his phone entirely, as if the joke had gone sour in his hands. Elves. I don't need anyone to feel sorry for me, Wyatt said, his voice low, clear, and tired in a way that made the whole room listen. Elves. But she needed to eat. There it is, Preston laughed. The noble poor man. Then with a careless sweep of his arm, he knocked the edge of the tray. Elves. The bowl tipped. Tomato soup spilled across the table, down onto the tile, and over the toe of Wyatt's worn boot. Elves. Nobody laughed this time. The sound of it was small ceramic scraping, liquid spreading, a spoon spinning once before it went still, but it felt like the loudest thing that had happened in that room all night. Elves. Wyatt looked at the soup on the floor. He looked at Ruth, whose eyes had gone wet with anger and something close to grief. Elves. Then he bent down, picked up the spoon, and set it gently back on the table. You shouldn't have done that, he said quietly. Elves. What are you going to do about it? Preston smirked. Wyatt reached for a stack of napkins from the dispenser and began wiping the floor himself, slow and careful. Elves. Not because Preston deserved it. Not because the diner deserved it. Because Daisy had once asked him why people should clean up messes they didn't make, and he had told her. Because the world gets better when somebody chooses to make it better. Elves. Ruth watched him kneel beside the ruined meal, protecting everyone else's dignity in that room except his own. And in that quiet, humble act, she saw the truth more clearly than any quarterly report could ever have shown her. Elves. Wyatt finished wiping the floor while the whole diner sat in the kind of silence that doesn't forgive easily. Ruth stood slowly, still wearing her borrowed coat, still playing the part of a woman with nowhere to go. Elves. But something behind her eyes had changed. They were no longer tired, they were wide awake. Thank you, she whispered. Elves. Wyatt nodded once. Find somewhere dry tonight, he said. He reached into his pocket, checked that the bread was still clean, and held it for 1 second like a father holding on to his last promise. Elves. Then he set 2 quarters on the table, the only tip he had left to give, and walked out into the rain beside the woman he still believed was poor. Elves. Somebody in the back booth had already posted a video before the door swung shut behind them. But the clip did not show Wyatt offering the meal. Elves. It did not show Preston mocking his daughter. It did not show the soup being knocked to the floor. It began with Wyatt standing over the spilled bowl, Preston's voice calm and professional in the background, and a caption already written to make the world cruel in a completely different direction. Elves. Angry warehouse worker causes scene at local diner. By morning at 7:03 a.m. it had already been shared across Asheville, then Charlotte, then far beyond both. Elves. People who had never gone hungry decided what hunger was supposed to look like. People who had never carried a custody letter in a manila envelope decided exactly what kind of father Wyatt Calloway must be. Elves. At 6:10 a.m. Wyatt's warehouse supervisor called. His voice was tired but not unkind. Wyatt, I have to suspend you, pending review. Elves. Wyatt sat at his kitchen table in the dim blue light before sunrise, still in yesterday's clothes, his boots drying by the radiator. Elves. You saw the video, he said. HR saw it, came the answer. There's more to it than that, Wyatt said. Elves. I believe you, the supervisor answered. But belief isn't paperwork. At 8:32 a.m. the phone rang again. This time it was a caseworker from County Family Services. Elves. Her voice was careful and heavy with procedure. Mr. Calloway, we've received information regarding an incident at your workplace affiliate. Elves. Given the ongoing review, we'll need updated proof of income and household stability within 14 days. Wyatt looked at the empty refrigerator, the unpaid electric bill sitting on the counter, the bread still wrapped in Daisy's napkin. Elves. How long do I have? He asked. Not long, she said gently. Daisy appeared in the hallway then, small and barefoot, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Elves. She saw the envelope on the table before Wyatt could slide it out of sight. Children always see exactly what a grown-up is trying to hide. Elves. Are they going to take me away? She asked. The question broke the whole room into pieces. Wyatt crossed to her and knelt so his eyes were level with hers, and he wrapped his arms around her, and he said nothing at all because there was nothing honest left to say. Elves. Margaret Ashworth watched the edited clip once, then again, then a third time with the sound off, because lies often reveal themselves more clearly in silence. Elves. She sat back in her office on the 40th floor before sunrise, still wearing the olive coat over her blouse, her hair still damp at the ends, her shoes still stained from last night's rain. Elves. Her chief of staff, a sharp, quiet woman named Priya, no, we'll call her, Denise Cole, stood beside the table with a tablet in one hand and worry all over her face. Elves. The clip is spreading fast, Denise said. Preston's office is already calling it a customer safety incident. Margaret didn't look up. Elves. Get me the store cameras, she said, every angle. Front counter, dining room, kitchen entrance, parking lot. Audio, too, if they have it. Elves. 3 hours later, the truth arrived across separate files, each one time-stamped, each one colder than the last. Margaret sat alone as the first video began playing at 10:14 a.m. Elves. There was Ruth Callahan hunched in the corner booth. There was the waitress refusing her a cup of coffee. There was Preston stepping in, clean-suited and cold. Elves. Then there was Wyatt walking through the door, counting coins at the register, paying for a meal with the careful math of a man who could not afford a single mistake. Elves. Margaret leaned in when he set the tray down in front of the woman she'd been that night. No flourish. Elves. No performancy, placed quietly on a table. The second angle showed what the public video had cut out entirely. Preston mocking Wyatt's daughter by name, the tray being knocked aside on purpose, the soup spilling across the tile and over-worn boot leather. Elves. And Wyatt kneeling, not to protest, not to shame anyone, but simply to clean up a mess he hadn't made. Elves. Margaret pressed a hand over her mouth. She had seen corporate dishonesty before, men who bent numbers, buried complaints, polished ugliness until it passed for strategy. Elves. But this was different. This was the exact moment a company lost its soul over a $2 bowl of soup. Elves. Then came the parking lot footage. Wyatt walking Ruth to the bus stop under a broken awning while rain fell in bright silver lines through the streetlight. Elves. Taking off his own jacket and draping it over her shoulders, even though he was already shivering. Waiting until the bus arrived. Elves. Stepping back before she boarded, giving her space, giving her dignity, asking for absolutely nothing in return, not even her real name. Elves. When the bus pulled away, he stood alone under that awning and pulled the folded napkin from his pocket. The bread inside was damp at one corner. Elves. He checked it anyway, carefully, hopefully, as if love could still be carried home safely even after a night like that one. Elves. The little purple crayon heart was visible on the screen for less than 2 seconds. Margaret paused the video there and stared at it until the office around her blurred at the edges. Elves. Find him, she said. For legal, her chief of staff asked. No. Margaret said, for justice. By noon, she had his full personnel file, his complaint history, and the emergency scheduling request he had submitted the month his daughter's asthma had flared up 3 nights in a row. Elves. Preston had marked it denied. Preston listed low priority. Margaret read those 2 words twice, low priority. A widowed father trying to keep his daughter fed had been labeled low priority by a company built entirely on the promise of feeding families. Elves. By 3 that afternoon, the regional boardroom at Prescott Family Kitchens was full of people who genuinely believed the meeting was about protecting the brand. Elves. Preston Wade sat near the front with a legal folder open, his tie perfectly centered, his expression calm in the way guilty men sometimes practice in a mirror. Elves. Around him sat directors, 2 attorneys, and a public relations officer who had already drafted a statement calling Wyatt Calloway's behavior unfortunate, disruptive, and inconsistent with company values. Elves. Margaret entered last. No tailored suit, no gold watch, no polished armor of any kind. She walked in wearing the same olive coat from the diner, the cuffs still faintly damp, the hem still stained from the storm. Elves. Conversation died the moment she stepped through the door. Preston half rose from his chair. Margaret. We were just reviewing the incident. We have a strategy. Elves. Sit down, she said. He paused. We have a strategy, he tried again. No, she replied. You have a cover story. Elves. The room went very still. Margaret placed a small remote on the table and looked toward the screen at the far wall. Elves. The first image appeared, the public clip everybody had already seen. Wyatt standing near the spilled soup, Preston looking composed. Elves. The caption blaming a warehouse worker for a disturbance he never started. As you can see, Preston said, he created the disturbance. Elves. Margaret clicked again. A new video filled the screen, Ruth Callahan alone in her booth, the waitress refusing her, and Preston's own voice unmistakable. Do not feed her. Elves. She is not. Few faces in the room changed. Not much, not yet. Just the slight lowering of a chin. Elves. The quiet discomfort of people recognizing truth before they were ready to name it out loud. Margaret clicked again. Wyatt entering. Elves. Counting coins, paying for soup and bread, turning at the sound of humiliation, walking across the room, setting down the only meal he had bought. Elves. She's a customer tonight, his voice said clearly through the speakers. Nobody in the room moved. That angle doesn't show the full context, Preston tried. Elves. Then let's keep watching, Margaret answered. The next clip played Preston mocking Wyatt's job, mentioning his daughter by name, calling his kindness sentimental nonsense. Elves. Then the tray tipping, the soup spilling, and Wyatt, instead of shouting, bending down with a fistful of napkins to clean the floor. Elves. The boardroom went so quiet the air conditioning sounded like wind blowing across an empty field. One attorney slowly closed his folder. Elves. The public relations officer turned her printed statement face down on the table without being asked. He filed false complaints, Preston said, his voice tightening now. Elves. He made accusations against our food disposal process. Margaret clicked once more. Elves. Photographs of sealed trays behind a store, edible bread bagged and marked for the dumpster, internal emails carrying Preston's own approval, and finally a scanned copy of Wyatt's original complaint, dated 6 weeks earlier, respectful, detailed, and completely ignored. Elves. Mr. Calloway told the truth before any of us were brave enough to listen to it, Margaret said quietly. This company cannot be run by emotion, Preston said, standing now. Elves. Margaret turned to face him fully. This company sells food, she answered. If hunger does not move us, then we have absolutely no business being in this business at all. Elves. Nobody applauded. That would have been far too easy. Instead, something heavier settled over the room, the kind of silence that only arrives when power finally loses its costume in front of everyone watching. Elves. Margaret placed a printed document on the table in front of him. Preston Wade, effective immediately. Your employment with this company is terminated. Elves. Your authorization over regional operations is revoked, and legal will review every complaint denied under your supervision, going back 3 years. Elves. Preston opened his mouth, but for the first time in his entire career, no words came out. The man who had always known exactly what to say had nothing left to offer. Elves. Margaret faced the room again. The advertising campaign is canceled, she said. That budget is being redirected into a permanent community meal program at every Prescott family kitchen location in this state. Elves. Not for the cameras, not for a press release, for people. And Wyatt Calloway will receive a full public apology before sundown. Elves. On the screen behind her, the final frame stayed paused, Wyatt's hand, holding a folded napkin, a small purple crayon heart pressed against it. Elves. Nobody in that room dared call him poor again. The apology reached Wyatt's phone at 4:47 p.m., though he never saw it right away. Elves. He was sitting on the edge of Daisy's bed, taping a sheet of clear plastic over the drafty window, pretending it was a project instead of a problem. Elves. The apartment smelled faintly of toast, laundry soap, and the tomato soup he had never managed to bring home the night before. Elves. Daisy had been quiet all day, the kind of quiet children use when they're trying hard, not to make an already worried parent more worried. Elves. Then somebody knocked. Not loud, not official. Just 3 soft taps against the old wooden door. Wyatt stood slowly, half expecting the caseworker or a landlord's notice or one more piece of paper asking him to prove all over again that he was enough. Elves. When he opened the door, Margaret Ashworth stood in the hallway. No olive coat this time, no disguise, no cameras trailing behind her. Elves. Just a woman holding a covered box of hot food in both hands, and something that looked very close to shame in her eyes. Elves. Wyatt stared at her. Recognition arrived slowly, then all at once. Ruth, he said. She shook her head gently. Margaret. Elves. Margaret Ashworth. Behind him, Daisy peeked around the kitchen doorway. Margaret looked at the child and smiled with a tenderness that made Wyatt's guarded expression falter for the first time all day. Elves. I owe you both the truth, she said. Wyatt didn't invite her in right away. A man who has been humiliated by the world learns to be careful when the world comes back holding gifts. Elves. Is this pity, he asked. Margaret's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. No, she said. This is Justice arriving late. Elves. She handed him a folder. Elves. Inside was a formal written apology signed by the company, confirmation that his suspension had been lifted and his back pay approved, his original complaint reopened for a full review, and a new position offered community meals coordinator for the entire region, with benefits, steady hours, and a salary large enough to make family services stop treating poverty like a character flaw. Elves. Wyatt read the first page, then the second. His hand stopped moving on the third, where it said his name would be permanently attached to the program. Elves. I didn't ask for this, he said quietly. I know, Margaret answered. That's exactly why it matters. Daisy stepped forward then, holding out half a cookie wrapped in a paper napkin. Elves, are you the lady Daddy gave the soup to? She asked. Margaret knelt down so they were eye to eye. Elves. Yes, sweetheart, she said. I am. Daisy studied her for a long moment, then held the cookie out further. We share things here, she said. Elves. That broke something open in Margaret that no boardroom in her entire career had ever managed to reach. She accepted the cookie with both hands, like it was something sacred. Elves. 6 months later, every Prescott family kitchen location in the state had one small table near the front window with a simple sign propped beside it, reserved for anyone hungry. Elves. No purchase necessary, no explanation required. In the Asheville location right beside that sign hung a framed paper napkin with a faded purple crayon heart and one small backward letter. Elves. Wyatt never much cared for speeches, so he never gave one. He simply showed up every morning, checked the kitchen inventory, greeted the staff by name, and made sure that no child, no parent, and no tired stranger in a wet coat was ever treated like their hunger made them less human. Elves. Preston Wade's name disappeared from the company directory within the month, but Wyatt Calloway's quiet, stubborn dignity changed the way that entire company measured success, not only in profit, and not only in growth, but in warm bowls served. Doors kept open and people allowed to sit down before anyone made them prove they belonged there. Elves. And Margaret Ashworth, who once put on a second-hand coat to go looking for the truth, found something even larger than the truth that night. Elves. She found a man who had almost nothing left and still gave the last of it away because some part of him still believed the world could be worth saving. Elves. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes only. All characters, names, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person, living or dead, or any actual establishment. Elves. Any resemblance to real persons, organizations, or events is purely coincidental. This content is intended to explore themes of human dignity, workplace ethics, and social justice through narrative storytelling. It does not make factual claims about any individual company or institution.